Welcome to the 14th Sunday after Pentecost, Sunday, August the 25th, 2024. This is the Manna at the Tap podcast, where we as a community actively seek the spiritual nourishment our souls crave. I'm Gloria, your fellow traveler on this spiritual journey, and together we offer and receive insights and interpretations from the daily lectionary readings, which provide the manna designed to nurture our spiritual growth. Today's lectionary text is 1 Kings chapter 8, which focuses on Solomon and the dedication of the newly built temple, Solomon's speech to the assembly of Israel, his prayer of dedication to the Lord, and his commitment to the foreigners living within Israel's borders. Now, this same narrative can also be found in 2 Chronicles chapter 6. The theme is the power of prayer, as uttered by King Solomon before the assembly of Israel at the dedication of the temple at Jerusalem, which Solomon built for the Lord. In a private moment through a dream, God initiated a conversation with Solomon, asking him what he wanted from God. Solomon's reply pleased the Lord because he asked for a discerning heart to guide God's people. And God granted his request, adding that he would give him wisdom, a discerning heart, wealth, honor, and a long life if he continued living right before the Lord. As the new king of Israel, Solomon will be in the public's eye as he executes the transfer of the Ark of the Covenant from its temporary home in the tabernacle. And by the way, that temporary home was over 500 years old, to its permanent home in the Holy of Holies in the new temple. When the Ark of the Covenant was situated in its new home, a cloud filled the temple, and the glory of the Lord's presence filled the sacred space. After a few brief introductory words, Solomon addressed the assembly. He blessed them as they stood up, reminding them that the building of the temple was the fulfillment of God's promise to his father David. Solomon's rule would be both a continuation of his father's greatness and also an improvement. There was David's vision and God's assurance. So let's use our imagination to see Solomon's bodily posture as he stands before the altar of the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly of Israel. We'll see he spreads out his hands to heaven as he begins to pray. He described God as fulfilling with God's hand what God had promised with his mouth. He included the community in his prayer to God, reminding them that God is worthy of their full attention. The Lord is a covenant-keeping God, steadfast in love, and the fulfillment of promises if his people will be faithful to him. Lest there be any misunderstanding about the place of worship, verse 27 of chapter 8 makes this very clear. Solomon acknowledged that this house, meaning the temple, is not God's dwelling place, because even the heaven and the highest heaven cannot contain God, much less a temple built by Solomon's hands. God is present and accessible in the temple, but cannot be boxed in. Solomon ended his prayer by asking God to hear the plea of his heart and the heart of the people when they prayed toward the temple. He asked that God would listen in heaven, God's dwelling place, and he would hear and forgive. Solomon concluded his prayer in verses 41 to 43, and this prayer was about foreigners coming from distant lands because of God's name. And he asked that God would hear the prayers of the foreigners when they face the temple, and that God would not only hear, but God would answer their prayer. The temple was central to Israel's worship for many centuries. But when it was destroyed, and it was destroyed 2 times, God was and is still present with and attentive to his people. Gentiles were considered to be foreigners, and Solomon included all of them and us. This is why we are invited to give thanks and to celebrate. God is present with all of his people. He hears the prayers of all and will respond with his mercy and his grace.